Welcome back to our channel with a new episode. And today we have with us Miss Lostris, who will be giving her introduction herself. And I'm sure she has some very interesting stories for us and the listeners. Welcome to our channel.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Ghosts Incorporated. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you. And in case listeners, you were wondering, Lostris is obviously not my real name. It's an ancient Egyptian name, which is actually the name of one of my favorite characters from a book by Wilbur Smith. I suppose that sort of already gives you a fair hint into the kind of things that I like. So, yes, I'm a big fan of mythology. I'm a big fan of history. I love fiction. So I'm a marketeer and writer by profession. And I'm sort of putting the cart before the horse. But the stories that I want to share with you today, trust me, they are not fiction. They actually happened with me in real life. So I hope you have a good time listening to them. You can take it with a pinch of salt because what I will share with you is something that happened to me when I was 6 years old. Um, Although, even though when I look back at it in hindsight with an adult's perspective, it still seems fairly real and fairly true. So, in my mind, it is still as true and as real as it was all those years ago.
So listeners, आपको मैं बता दूं हिंदी में कि मिस लॉस्ट्रिस उनका नाम नहीं है, लेकिन वो एक फेवरेट कैरेक्टर के पीछे अपना नाम रखना चाहती हैं क्योंकि उनका इंटरेस्ट यहीं पे है. एंड वी आर वेरी लकी टू हैव विद अस अ राइटर ऑफ फिक्शन एंड शी इज आल्सो अ मार्केटर बाय प्रोफेशन. लेकिन वो जो बताने जा रही हैं वो बिल्कुल सच है और उनके बचपन का एक्सपीरियंस है. प्लीज प्लीज कंटिन्यू.
So yes, thank you, Ghost Incorporated and listeners. So let me jump right into the story. I think we have had enough of, जैसे हम हिंदी में कहते हैं, भूमिका बांधना हो चुका है. So let's get on with it. So I was born and brought up in one of the largest cities in North India back in the 80s. Don't go asking my age, please. I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer that. But yeah. So I was born and brought up there. And as you can imagine, the summers and the winters are fairly extreme in those cities. So in the summer, it would be really warm. And in the winters, it would be really cold, bitingly cold and chilly. And there would often be fog around. I was lucky enough to have grown up in a large colonial era building. So our family actually lived in a very, very large house where there were about 50 of us at any given point of time. And it was a very old British era building with lots of hidden nooks and crannies, um, countless rooms. I mean, if I think back about it and remember, I actually cannot count the number of rooms that were there, and several people around. So it was a very large, bustling household and a very busy house per se. However, as luck would have it, there would end up being certain times of the day or the night when I seem to be the only person around. And let me just set the context of how the house was laid out. So we used to have an inner gated garden, what we traditionally call as angan. So उस पूरे बड़े से घर के बीच में एक आंगन हुआ करता था और उस आंगन के चारों तरफ एक वरांडा था, right? So around that entire angan or open space, there was a veranda running all through. And we used to live, or rather, my part of the family used to live on the first floor of this ginormous house, right? So in the night, one night, I was outside and I had just finished watching a movie with my uncle. Please bear in mind that I was all of 6.5 years old at this time and had the absolute confidence that only a child that age can have, with no understanding of how dangerous or how risky the world can be. And I was happily taking a stroll along the veranda, which was facing the angan, so to say. And I was walking from one end of the veranda to the other end.
Were you
Now,
alone?
my uncle was just No, my uncle was there, and we had just finished watching the movie, and he was just winding up. And in those times, there used to be these VHS tapes and these cassette players and recorders. We used
Mm-hmm.
to uh, we used to rent out video cassettes, and we used to watch them. Those used to be our weekend treats. I still remember it was a Friday night, and there was no school the next morning, so I was allowed to stay up late and watch this movie with him. Anyhow, so we had just finished watching the movie, and the rest of the house was quite silent. If I remember correctly, it was past 1 o'clock in the morning. It was past 1 a.m. in the morning. You may argue super
It's
late for a child that needs to
yes,
be
absolutely.
to be awake. I know. But it was just one of those things. It was just a weekend treat, like I said. So for once, I was allowed. So anyway, so my uncle was putting away the the cassette, and switching off all the equipment and all of that. And I had just come out to the veranda to sort of take a stroll, breathe in some fresh air. It was a beautiful, lovely summer night, with absolutely clear skies, a lovely, bright, brilliant moon in the sky. I remember all of this. You know why?
Why?
Because Yeah, because once when I reached one end of the veranda to the other, I turned around, and at the other corner, I could make out a figure standing there. Now, please bear in mind that the veranda was fairly long. It would easily have been about 15 feet or so in length, perhaps about 20, I think, if I remember correctly. And this figure was standing at the absolute other corner of the veranda from where I was standing. So I could not clearly make out any features or any defining characteristics of the person, because it just looked like it was an adult figure draped in some sort of white garment, right? Excuse me. Draped in some sort of white garment, right from head to toe. And that figure was standing at the edge of the veranda, absolutely still. Now, because I could not make out the face of the person, I could not even understand whether that person was facing me or whether I was looking at the back of the person. So I did the most obvious thing that I could in those circumstances, and I called out, asking, "Hello, who's there?" And I received no response. Now, it was very strange for me at that time, as a child of 6.5, to ask an obvious adult living in a house with so many adults in the building, to
Mm-hmm.
ask somebody and not even receive a response. So I found the whole thing quite strange. I did the next best thing I could. I somehow thought that something was wrong, and I went to check with my uncle, right? So I went to ask him, and I realized that he had stepped into the washroom for a break. So he was not in the room when I went back to get him back to come to the veranda with me. So I decided not to wait. So I went back to the veranda, because honestly, by this time I was maybe a little surprised more than worried. I was not scared at all. I mean, it was my house, it was my family, it was an absolutely regular Friday night, so there was nothing to be scared of per se. So I went back, and I realized that that figure had disappeared. So then I thought that perhaps I might have made a mistake, or perhaps it might have been a trick of the light, or perhaps it might have been a shadow by something flying by or passing by or whatever. I tried to rationalize it to myself in my own mind,
You were
right?
not scared. Did
Well,
you?
no. So that's the funny part of it. Even till this point, I was still not scared, because I thought that either I had misseen, either I had made a mistake, or there might be some other rational explanation for it, or perhaps whoever had come in at that point of time may have gone out. Somebody might have just gotten up for a glass of water, for a drink of water, or something like that. And I didn't realize. Anyway, so I went back again, and the way that the house was structured was that the end of the veranda actually led into the drawing room, and beyond the drawing room was the main staircase of the house that ran the entire height of the house. This staircase was very special and custom made to that extent, considering that it was a wooden staircase. It was like a period piece. And the biggest joke about that staircase was that you could never keep a secret if you were going up and down that staircase, because it would make such a loud noise. Footsteps would be heard very clearly on those steps. So that night, as I went through the veranda into the drawing room to switch off the light to go and join back my uncle, who was just coming out of the washroom, I was just about to switch off the light when I heard steps going down the staircase. Dub, dub, dub. Very, very clearly. And I remember it so clearly because the night was so silent that those sounds carried so clearly that it's almost still etched in my mind. I mean, honestly, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking back to it and just reliving those moments, because that was the first instant that I felt the first frisson of fear. Until that time, I had been thinking that there must be some other explanation for it, or it might have been a trick of the light or something else.
So
So
did you
the
think
next
that
thing I did,
it could be a thief?
uh, if it had been a thief, and I have sort of gone over it in my mind several times, if it had been a thief, then considering that that was an adult sized individual, he or she could have had two reactions. One is that they could have fled. The
Hmm.
second is that they could have come to catch me, considering that I was a small child. But there had been absolutely zero reaction from that person when I had called out to that figure, asking who it was and what they wanted. So,
Okay.
had it been a thief, I don't think that a thief would have stood absolutely still, waiting for me to go and sound the alarm, so to say,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I have sort of debated that in my own head several times, and I have reached the conclusion that it might have been a million other things, but I'm sure it could not have been a thief.
Okay.
So, anyway, coming back to the particular incident. So, like I said, the minute I heard those footsteps was actually the first instant when I felt fear for the first time. And that was the moment that I realized that something was not right and that I had better go and seek the help of an adult. So, I switched off the light and I ran to my uncle's room where he was still in the bathroom, and I was banging on his door and screaming at the top of my voice, asking him to come out. And he himself got absolutely perturbed and he was wondering what went wrong. And he came out in the next couple of seconds and he sort of tried to calm me down and all of that. And then, I mean, I obviously had some trouble falling asleep, but by next morning, things were back to normal. And I sort of, tried to rationalize it away in my own mind. But to
Did
this
you
day, I know what I saw and I know what I heard.
did you talk about it to the adults at home?
So I did. And to be very honest, the house that we grew up in, the house that I grew up in, my parents grew up in, and all of that, um, like I said, that it was a British colonial era house. And obviously, it came with its own history and its own set of tragedies associated with it. So, as I kept growing up in that house, I realized that these kinds of incidents had happened not only with me, but with a few other members of the family as well. And yeah, when we all get around together and swap ghost stories, it's quite funny to see whose experience tops whose. Yeah.
So this house was kind of labeled as haunted. Would you like to call it
Not
that?
really. I
Mm.
wouldn't say it was haunted. I would just say that it was a very interesting house where a lot of interesting things happened.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
So
not haunted because,
so there
I
was
mean, there was,
coexistence.
yes, sort of. Yeah, yeah. And it's
Interestingly,
not that such incidents happen with everyone. It happened with very select people, very few people.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you that did you have any other experience, anything similar, or maybe?
Yes, this was the very first one that I had in that house, and I spent the next several years of my life there. And over the years, there were a few other experiences that I also had. And later on in life, as I grew up and I spoke to other people in the family about it, I realized that other people have also had similar kinds of experiences in that same house. Yes.
Mm, Rather than going back to the incidents that you had, I would like to understand how did it feel to grow up in a house where you knew that there would be some kind of paranormal activity around the corner, perhaps?
You know, as a child, if you experience something like this, then your inherent willingness to accept something like that, I think, is far higher than when you look at it from an adult's perspective or from a very rational lens and all of that. I'm not saying that I'm not rational. I'm extremely rational, which is why I said that even later on in life I have tried to go back and think over it and think.
So, Lostris, I would like, this is something which is very interesting that we have noticed with people who have had a touch with the paranormal, that they have taken it in their stride. Since you say that you are a very rational person, so you never thought that it could bring you harm.
Well, the one time when I mean, this first time that I did have my encounter, and when, so to say, the house was all silent and there was no adult in sight, and I was all alone and probably at my vulnerable best, I don't think I was harmed or I was threatened in any way. So maybe that was the reason that I didn't feel that way.
Yes, so this is something that we've been noticing that when people have been sharing their stories with us, that we haven't come across so called spirits who are harming. So, do you feel these spirits? We've had conversations with the psychiatrist that bad spirits are kind of overvalued, according to her, and it is all because of commercialization for horror
I
stories,
have
for
a
thriller movies.
Sure, sure. See, honestly, if you ask me, I think that's just how our, so to say, our real life or our regular life also is, right? I mean, if you think back to your day, your entire day from morning to night today, and if I ask you for 10 good things that happened to you today, you probably wouldn't be able to list them. But if I
Hmm.
asked you that tell me three bad things that happened to you, I think they would be absolutely on the top of your mind. I think that's just how we are wired, that we remember the bad much more than we remember the good. So it takes a lot of effort and practice to sort of um, keep focus away from the bad and focus more on the good, so to say. I think the same thing applies to ghosts and horror stories and horror movies. And eventually, that's what people like to read and like to watch and like to listen to, right? I mean, uh,
Yes,
the incident that I just narrated, there was no electrifying action in it, there was no life threatening
but it
danger
was a
there. So,
real life experience, and that is what is
yes, yes,
important, that we
sure,
don't
sure. But
discard the idea of the other world while there is nothing to be scared of.
yes, yes. I mean, I would just put an asterisk over there. Later on in life, I have had scary experiences as well,
So
but
we will
I
bring
think
you
that's
back
a
again.
story for another time.
Yes, but just as a last question, I would like to know, do you feel the attitude of your family mattered here, that you didn't grow up scared and uh, fearful?
Yes, I think that played a very important part. Like I mentioned earlier, as I spoke to more and more people in the family, more and more members of the family, I realized that other people had also had very similar experiences, some similar, some different, and so on. But I don't think anybody was really harmed or threatened to that extent, and we sort of took it in our stride. And somehow, I think somewhere there was also the inherent understanding that some of these spirits might be our own family members who might have passed earlier, and so on and so forth. So it wasn't like an absolute alien entity which was there and which was out to get us.
Thank you so much. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, perhaps, and it's going to reassure a lot of our listeners. Thank you, Ms. Lostris, for joining us. And we will like to welcome you back again for that particular horror story that you have kept aside for the next time. Thank you, listeners. We are the Ghosts Incorporated. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share our channel. Stay connected.